time is 6:40 on this Tuesday, and joining us this morning is U.S. Senator Jon Tester. Thank you so much for taking time. I really appreciate it.
It's great to be here. Thanks on this wintry day.
Right. I hear you braved the roads early this morning.
It's pretty slick.
From your farm.
Pretty slick coming in, so take a little extra time.
Right. I'm glad you're here safe. We have a lot of things to cover this morning, so why don't we just go ahead and jump right in. The first is U.S. AG William Barr. He was recently in Montana talking with tribes about MMIP here in the state and across the country.
Yep.
What do you hope to see from that visit, or what were you impressed or not impressed by?
Well, if I was going to ask for one thing that would, I think, really help is a FBI agent dedicated to that. And now that's not in his purview, that's in Director Wray's purview, but the truth is that we need more law enforcement on the ground. If he can help through the Department of Justice, or we can get help through the FBI or BIA, I think that would help a lot. I think investigators are critically important, especially at a time when they're pulling back on FBI agents in the state of Montana. So I think it's really important. Of course, there's a number of things that also need to be done. Good communication between tribal law enforcement, between federal law enforcement and the county government law enforcement, and then making sure that the folks report the missing person immediately. There's a lack of trust, I think, between Native Americans and U.S. Marshal Service, and we need to work on making sure that's over decades and decades, by the way. It didn't just happen. And we need to work to make sure that trust is restored so that folks, when they report a missing person, it's not seen as a runaway, but it's actually seen as a missing person.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up on this topic before we move on. Barr did say that President Trump would be coming out with more action or more thoughts about MMIP here in the country. What do you expect to see from the White House?
Well, I don't know. I think that a lot of what Attorney General Barr came in and said were things that were already in the works. I think, like I said, what would really help is if the president came out and put some more feet on the ground as far as law enforcement goes in Indian country. These are vast pieces of land that, quite frankly, these reservations don't have the law enforcement they need. And I think it'd make a big difference. These are places where poverty is high and crime is high, and we need to go to work and make it a priority.
Okay, and moving on, there's so much more we could talk about on that
that's
subject
a big
alone.
issue.
This past Sunday was International Survivors of Suicide Day, and I know that you've done some work in that aspect here in Montana.
Yeah, well, look, we lead the nation in suicide in Montana. We're a rural state. We tend to flip back and forth with Alaska. So there's a couple things we need to do. We need to get more providers on the ground. I'm talking psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, those kind of folks that can help when people get in crisis. And then I've got a couple bills. One deals with veterans. This is John Scott Hannon. John Scott Hannon was a person who committed suicide, a veteran that committed suicide about a year ago. This bill will make it easier to hire folks for the VA, cut a lot of the red tape down, be able to use telehealth a lot easier. And then I've got one for agriculture folks, farmers and ranchers. Prices in commodities are way down, and paying the bills is getting to be a harder and harder issue. So we've got a bill out there that'll take the stigma out of mental health issues for folks that are involved in agriculture, and train some folks within the Farm Service Agency and the USDA to help when they see a farmer in crisis.
Right, and just speaking of our farmers, ranchers, and especially the holidays, which can be a really tough
You're exactly right.
time of year for those with mental health issues.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about USMCA, U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. We are almost to the new year, just days left. Do you have any hope of this getting passed, or?
Well, yes. I mean, I think there's dysfunction all over the place in Washington. We could talk about that for an hour. But the truth is that NAFTA is still in effect, but USMCA needs to get voted on. We need to pass. I think that what they're working on in the House, I am told, is to make it so that prescription drugs can get turned into generics quicker. I think that's important. And I think the labor standards are important so that folks aren't working for slave labor in Mexico and Canada, more so in Mexico than Canada. So those are important. But in the end, we need trade, and we need to expand the markets. Those of us involved in agriculture understand that if we don't export what we raise, we're in big trouble in Montana. And I think we're seeing it with the prices in the commodity, whether it's beef, whether it's grains, whether it's pulse crops, it doesn't matter. They're all pretty low. And now is the time of year where folks are looking at getting their operating loan for next year. And when those prices are low, it makes it really tough on the bankers, and it makes it worse on the farmers and ranchers. So we need to get those markets expanded. If USMCA came over tomorrow and made it to the Senate, I'd support it and move it forward. But the bottom line is these markets need to be expanded, whether it's with Canada, Mexico, or the Pacific Rim, or the EU, all the above.
Okay, and just continuing on that topic, other things seem to be delayed, or this USMCA seems to have been delayed.
Yes.
Do you think that the impeachment hearings that have been going on, and we almost can't seem to avoid them, has
Yeah.
that delayed major things like USMCA?
In the Senate, it has had no impact because all the hearings have been done in the House. And what we have in the Senate is we've got a number of bills that could be taken up, whether it's bills to support violence against women, whether it's bills to support education. The list is long, and it'd be great to get some of these done. But we haven't been in the Senate. We've been voting on judges and some appointees to the different agencies. I think it's really important we get some legislation done. And by the way, the bills I'm talking about are bipartisan. They had passed by probably 80 votes.
Wow.
In the House, they have been working on the impeachment stuff, but they've also kicked out a lot of bills. I think USMCA is the one that they probably need to work on the most to get it out because we need it in agriculture.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up before we wrap up. What is your #1 priority going into next year for Senate?
Well, there's a number of priorities. Number one, I think making sure we continue to work on the VA to make it all it can be. It's made some improvements, but it's got a long way to go to get so it fulfills the needs of our veterans. The second thing is I think it's working on markets. We've got to figure out a way. Congress has given up most of their power to the executive branch when it comes to trade agreements. It's important we take that power back and work to expand trade agreements. So we've got a lot of farm organizations and rancher organizations in the state of Montana that have worked literally for decades to get these markets set up, and the markets are going away. And one of the problems with getting out of TPP is now these countries are making deals with China instead of the United States. That's bad for our national security, and it's bad for the bottom line in agriculture. And as I've said before to you, I mean, family farm agriculture is really important in this country for food security, and we don't want to lose that. We want to empower it.
Yeah, definitely a tough season for our farmers and ranchers, along with the weather, too. It's just been a tough go-around.
It's been a wild year.
Yeah.
It's been a wild year.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have with Senator Tester today. We'll be right back after the break with Storm Tracker weather.
Thanks, Keeley.